Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to Making Sense with Move to Amend, edition number 4, I guess. Fourth week we have been at it. And amazingly, still haven't been thrown off of Facebook yet, huh? I guess we still aren't radical enough for the powers to be. Hey, how you doing, Michael?
I'm doing pretty good.
Great. Well, why don't we sort of introduce ourselves before we get started? Want to start, Michael?
Oh, sure. So I'm one of the local affiliate coordinators for Los Angeles chapter of Move to Amend. Yeah, it's my first time being a part of the show. So,
how long have you been connected to Move to Amend?
I've been involved in Move to Amend, I think, since like 2014, something like that. 2013, okay. 2014, somewhere on that time. But it's been like 5 years.
And how did you run into this?
So actually, the way I found out about Move to Amend was Thom Hartmann's show. Huh. He had written a book about the way that the 14th Amendment was manipulated by railroad barons in the late 1800s. And he talked about it a lot on the show and about Move to Amend. And so that's what got me to know about Move to Amend as a conceptually or as an organization. And then I reached out to LA. At that time was being coordinated by Ann Porter. And she came out and met me and we talked and, just kind of went from there. Eventually I met Daniel. And that's just how it all started.
Great. Well, that's a wonderful story. And kind of how it is with a lot of our active volunteers. They sort of run into it one way or another, sometimes word of mouth. In this case, Thom Hartmann, who has been a very strong advocate of Move to Amend for a very long time, since pretty much the beginning. So kudos to him and his program. And my name is Greg Coleridge. I'm the Outreach Director, have been so for the last 3 years. Prior to that, worked for the American Friends Service Committee, a Quaker-related organization, for about 30 years. And in that capacity, part of that time, worked with Move to Amend at a local and state level. So very happy you are here to join us on this beautiful, either noonish time, wherever you may be, if it's the West Coast, as Michael is, or middle of the afternoon, if it's Eastern time, where I am in Ohio. For people who are not familiar with Move to Amend, it is a coalition of hundreds of organizations and hundreds of thousands of individuals that are committed to bringing about authentic, real, legitimate democracy for the very first time. And toward that end, a stepping stone is working on what we call the We the People Amendment, a constitutional amendment that would abolish all forms of never intended inalienable constitutional rights, and also the equally bizarre doctrine that political money in elections is equivalent to free speech. We believe that a critical means to building a movement, because that's what it's going to take, a wide and deep, powerful democracy movement, grassroots movement, to do that and to do it rightly, legitimately, authentically, and truly democratically, we have to make sure everyone is equally seated at the table. And that includes people and communities that have been historically oppressed, that have never authentically been included, just now seeing them come to life again, as they have, along with many of us working in solidarity with people of color, with women, with students, if it's the March for Our Lives movement, many movements, many groups that have been historically oppressed, the Me Too movement, are on the move, trying to expand their amount of rights to truly be equal. And that is a tall order, because right from the get-go, it has been a pretty unequal democracy, quote unquote. So we're trying to work in solidarity with people on the front lines, believing that it is absolutely essential to do that, to create this movement that needs to be powerful enough to take on the political and economic establishment. So anyway, the agenda for the day, as is the case with all of these gatherings, is we sort of rousingly and radically, if you think radical is to get to the grassroots, reflect on issues of the day. And they have been nonsensical, so we try to make them sensical, the reality that is. by giving some comments, some reflections, some opinions and the like, and also try to share a few, at least one inspirational thing that has come our way. So why don't we get into it? Michael, you were going to start off? Go for it.
So the first thing I wanted to talk about today was the ongoing struggle to get people who have been convicted of felonies the ability to vote in Florida. So back in November 2018, via Florida's version of direct democracy, i.e. the ballot initiative, Floridians were convicted of certain felonies, basically excluding murder and felony sexual crimes, regain their voting rights after they have served their sentences along with their parole and probation. Now, this affected nearly 1.5 million people and about 20% of Black Floridians, because in Florida, felons often have to appeal to the governor's office to get their voting rights back. Now, when there was a Democrat who was governor, this actually wasn't as big an issue because they actually did it. They actually had a process, and people who did it actually were theoretically kind of able to do it. But under Ron DeSantis, that kind of more so ground to a halt, and it kind of made the issue more kind of prescient. Anyway, so they passed that in November 2018 as a ballot initiative. But then in January 2019, the Republican-led state legislature and then a law was passed there, which was then signed by Ron DeSantis, the governor, saying that part of what they considered your sentence, or some of the language of the original initiative, included the fees, restitution, what was the other thing, and fines, anything associated with your conviction, were part of your what you would call your sentence, or that whatever the general legal term is. So therefore, they applied a poll. I would consider, most democracy advocates would consider, a poll tax onto those people who have been convicted of a felony. This was, of course, lawsuits ensued, and a U.S. district court governing Florida passed the law saying that, or actually limited the law, and then filed an injunction saying that most felons could vote unless the state could prove they owed a debt. So that's the U.S. district court said that. But then the appeals court, which has been now become a conservative majority under Trump, he's packed that court. That court is now a conservative majority. They overturned that and undid the injunction. And so this went ultimately to the Supreme Court, and then recently the Supreme Court decided 5-4 not to restore the injunction and to leave things in place, which leaves disenfranchised 1.5 million felons in Florida. So that's kind of what's been going on with that in the last year and a half, that kind of saga of trying to give people, American citizens, back their ability to vote.
What a sickening, disgusting, just fundamentally anti-democratic effort. People, a tremendous grassroots effort by people. And, we have some people connected to Move to Amend in Florida. I think some of them were involved in the campaign to try to get felons the right to vote. They paid their dues to society, should be able to vote. And then the state just puts up this barrier yet again that how can they say it's not a form of a poll tax? Yeah. Of course it is.
They just don't care.
Yeah. Although I did read, was it today or yesterday, that there is an effort now led by athletes, including LeBron James. Hey, I'm from Akron, Ohio. LeBron's from Akron originally. Grew up in a Section 8 housing development, high rise called Spring Hill. His film company is named Spring Hill Film, and he's done really some wonderful stuff, good stuff on the court, but really some great stuff off the court as well for low-income people and people of color. And he has just started, I just read, a effort back in June called More Than a Vote that is raising money. He put $100,000 in himself, and he's gotten other athletes to collectively amass upwards of $1.5 million to pay for the owed amount of money that these felons, still owe the state, most of whom can't pay, some of whom I understand, and I don't know if this is because of negligence or just incompetence on the part of Florida officials, that, when people want to know how much they owe, they can't get a straight answer. So is that due to negligence, or is that due to intentionality? that if people don't know exactly how much they owe, how can they pay for it? And how can they get other people to pay for it?
That was part of the U.S. District Court's opinion, was that there were issues with the process of even doing this. That it was unclear in the law that was passed how they would implement it, how they would know, and so a lot of problems. That's part of the reason why why he limited the decision and said, okay, if you can prove somebody has a debt, then so be it. Like the law wasn't repealed. It wasn't like, oh, I'm really challenging that your interpretation of that statute, or the initiative, which the ballot initiative, even though I do think it was a manipulation. But the judge that ruled in the favor of the people who were convicted of felonies didn't even counter that. He just said, because of the way you all did this, if you want to really challenge them, so be it. But we're going to let them vote unless you fight to stop them from voting. And so it kind of put the onus back on the state to stop them, instead of the state essentially saying, you got to prove all your debts have been paid in order to, which, like you said, is so difficult for them to actually do, because sometimes they don't even know what debts they owe, or they might, or they might end up like that woman. I can't remember what state it is, but she voted when she was still on parole when they sent her to prison. And it's like, I didn't know. I was just trying to be a citizen, and I'm being punished for it because of an honest mistake. When other things happen where, I remember, was it Trump, somebody, or it might have been a congressman, but somebody voted, or maybe it was Pence, who voted, and like they were using the wrong address and they got caught, but they didn't go to jail. They just said, oops, sorry, and everything is fine. Stop doing that now. And they just kind of get let off with a slap on the wrist. But the average person, they end up getting sent to jail sometimes. The courts can be very cold-blooded that way sometimes.
Right.
When it comes to the average person that doesn't have $1 million lawyers and publicity and everything and make it an issue.
Well, we'll see where this effort goes. This both effort to try to get some clear transparency on what people do owe, as well as this effort to raise money to retire the debts faced by felons.
All that works. Yeah.
I did also see that that group, More Than a Vote, is going to be sponsoring a online showing of, I think it's pretty cool, John Lewis's new film that just came out before his passing, called Good Trouble. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth it. It's really excellent. They're going to be showing that online, and what money they raise will go toward this fund to help the felons. So, hopefully there isn't some game playing being done by DeSantis and others in Florida that denies people from knowing, so that they can't get those fines paid, so that, they can't vote. But, here's an example. Is it not? Here's an example. What's that?
I'm saying the real politics of it is they don't want them to vote.
Yeah, right.
No, they don't. That's been part of unfortunately, it's been part of the Republican Party's agenda for like 40 years, is that they want as few people to vote as possible. And it's just something that's indoctrinated and ingrained in almost all the elected officials. They just understand it. Like, if we can get less people to vote by doing something, let's do it.
And despite the fact that we have a couple constitutional amendments that gave black males the right to vote and women the right to vote, we still don't have an amendment that guarantees every person in this country the right to vote, at least citizen, the right to vote.
Yes.
That's one of the root problems.
I mean, we have access law and equal protection law, but not a guarantee of access. It's like in general, we can't stop you from voting because you're black or you're a woman. But if you can't vote for some reason, like a 4-hour line, or because you're a felon, too bad. Like, there are other reasons. There's still other reasons that can stop you from voting. It's just, it can't be because you're black or because you're a woman, but it can be indirectly because of that, and it can be for other reasons. There's no guarantee of a right to vote or an access to vote. It's just that you can't be prohibited explicitly for those reasons.
Right.
Like a negative.
That's why our We the People amendment, we've always said we need it, but it's not the end point. It's merely kind of a stepping stone, or something that needs to happen alongside other fundamental changes to our governing document, the U.S. Constitution. All right, so we move on. Next topic, wanted to say something about, which maybe you have run across, is the current stimulus bill that is working its way through Congress, and may even pass in some kind of form before the Senate departs, well, the House as well, for their extended August recess, which, hey, you can't get in the way of that, right? They got to get their free time in, which in previous years included junkets halfway around the world, which is, of course, a little more challenging now because U.S. Citizens aren't allowed to travel in because this pandemic is out of control, and we've been so negligent as a country in dealing with it. So I don't know where the guys and gals in Congress are going to go if they can't go to Aruba or Spain or the Greek Isles or somewhere else. But anyway, somehow they'll survive. But in the interim, hopefully they'll pass something that allows us, the 30 million people who have been benefiting and depending upon, in one form or another, some part or many parts of the stimulus bills that have so far been passed. And thus far, there have been 3 bills. What's being considered now is a 4th, particularly in the Senate. The House earlier, back in May, passed something called the HEROES Act, a $3.4 trillion package that would extend the $600 per week benefit till the end of the year, give another $1,200 payment to individuals, place a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures, cancel 10 grand in student debt, increase SNAP benefits, which is money for food stamps, and give more grants and loans to small businesses, and some healthcare coverage, which, as Move to Amend has assessed before, is good as far as it goes. The problem with it, and why we stood up against it, was that we didn't believe it went nearly far enough in terms of money, in terms of duration, in terms of coverage, as well as there being so many loopholes that the well-to-do was able to tap into. And quite frankly, we've seen that happen in the CARES Act, which was the most recent package that passed a month earlier. So here we have the House version, which isn't good enough. It seemed like the House negotiated with itself and sold itself out before they even brought anything to the table against Republicans. Who does that? I don't know, but
Democrats do.
Who negotiates with yourself and sells yourself short before you even go to the bargaining table? But it does show, does it not, the kind of power and influence powers to be had when it comes to protecting property, protecting the corporate crowd, protecting the rich. They dig in and, largely don't give an inch. But when it comes to people really in need, then they're ready to negotiate away before they negotiate with the other side. So anyway, again, it's as good as far as it goes. It doesn't go far enough. It's certainly better than what the Republicans are talking about. They've come up with, well, as we speak today, they're still trying to grapple with coming up with somewhere in the neighborhood of a $1 trillion package. What we know is it would extend unemployment assistance, but not at the $600 level. Probably what they're saying is only $100, which when you add to the average unemployment insurance at the state level, which averages about $300, you're talking about, instead of $900 per month, $300 plus $600, you're now only talking about $100 of unemployment insurance plus $100, maybe $200. Maybe the GOP will go up to another 100. We'll see how hard and fast the Dems sort of dig in. But if it's only $200, that's going to be merely $500, nowhere near what's needed to meet basic needs of people whose needs were not being met up to this point, who are just sort of treading water as it was, many losing the battle. We've seen inequality expand during this period, and this would only magnify that gap between rich and poor. I mean, it's bad politics. It's certainly bad morality, but it's horrible economics, because economists show, and study after study shows, that you put $1 into the economy, 2/3 of the economy is consumer spending. Now, it's somewhat distorted because of the last couple of packages coming from Congress, so much money coming down from the government. But in general, it's still about 2/3 is consumer spending. And the average research shows $1 that you spend, by consumers generates $1.6 in economic activity. It's bad economics if you take dollars away from people at the bottom. you put $1 in the pocket of Jeff Bezos, or you put $1 million in the pocket of Jeff Bezos versus take that $1 million and put it in the pocket of 100 people. Okay, 100 people, if they need a toaster oven, they're going to buy a toaster oven. That's 100 toaster ovens. If Jeff Bezos needs a toaster oven, how many is he going to buy? One? Maybe he'll splurge and get 3 or 5, but you're just not going to spend as much on toaster ovens. So that means toaster oven companies are not going to hire people, are not going to produce, are not going to benefit. It's just bad economics on top of the politics and on top of the morality. But that's what we're dealing with. So anyway, the GOP has come up with this plan. So far, that's what they say. By the way, sort of an interesting tidbit, under the CARES Act, the Pentagon got $10.5 billion on top of it. And apparently under what the GOP wants in this package, whatever the heck they call it, they're going to give the Pentagon on top of the budget bill, the military budget that is just passed the House and Senate. Yeah, 700 and some billion. They're going to get under the Republican plan another $21 billion on top of it. So it's just horrible all the way around. But on top of that, there's 2 just horrible provisions that we need to pay some attention to and say something about and weigh in. One is something that maybe people have heard about, read about, called corporate immunity, where they're basically trying to, and this is a quote unquote red line that Mitch McConnell is sort of drawing in the sand and saying nothing is going to pass. If you think you're going to get a nickel for anything, it ain't going to happen unless you sort of give this blanket immunity from prosecution to employers, customers, patients, students who may catch the virus due to business neglect. And they want to make it retroactive, going back to December of last year before there was a virus. And they want to forward it another 5 years through 2024. And they're getting all kind of lobbying pressure from all kinds of industries, from all kinds of companies, including hospitals and colleges and universities, ExxonMobil, Smithfield Foods, where they're packing people into the processing plants, Petroleum Marketers Association, the plastics industry, the Chamber of Commerce, utility corporations. It's just a massive giveaway from being responsible and being accountable. And so that's the one sort of thing we have to make sure does not show up in this bill, final bill. And the second is apparently just out yesterday is Mitt Romney is wanting to propose something called the quote unquote Trust Act that would, if passed, basically allow Congress to set up some blue ribbon committee of some sort that would develop some kind of legislation to quote unquote restore the solvency and otherwise improve the things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which are these trust funds that can very easily be changed just by jacking up the amount of money that's taken out of paychecks and making it more means tested. Very simple to do, but nope, this is a backhanded way to sort of gut and go after and cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So this is also a provision that should be opposed. So I don't know, anything that comes to mind, Michael, from your reading of what Congress is talking about?
Okay, I'm pretty pessimistic that anything's going to get passed. I do see the problem, the fundamental problem, and this is coming up now, but it always comes up with any kind of negotiations with the modern Senate, which is whoever's in charge, in this case the Republicans, and specifically them, is anything you want, even if they're willing or think it's good too, they're willing to put a gun to the head of the American people and say, you better give us the stuff you hate or we'll just do nothing. Like they will bluff, calamity. I mean, we're talking about if nothing passes and if we do not get some way of continuing to get money in people's pockets for the next 2 to 3 months, we're looking at seeing our economy, the bottom fall of our economy. That's what we're looking at potentially. Republicans know this. Some of them do. Some are just dumb or crazy, but some of them do know this. I think Mitch McConnell knows it. But they're willing to say, because they don't really believe the Democrats have any gumption, they're willing to say, we're willing to let economic and pandemic calamity strike us even more, even worse for the next 3 or 4 months if you don't give us all this stuff that we know you don't like. You're not asking very much from us. It's not an even negotiation. It's we can do the reasonable stuff that you want and we think we probably need to do too. But then also we got this stuff that we know that you don't like, that's ideological, that you better do or we'll just do nothing. And they feel like we can break their backs. The Democrats will cave, we'll get what we want, and the reasonable stuff will get done too. That's the hustle. That's the game that they play. And the Democrats have gone along with it for the past 6 years, basically. That's why, we see something where the House will pass something, the Senate won't even look at it. But the Senate passes something, the House is like, well, it's irresponsible for us not to look at it, so I guess we will. Well, what that does is that takes away the power of the House of Representatives, which is where all bills are supposed to come from.
Right.
Gives it to the Senate. And so basically the House is just a rubber stamp for whatever the Senate can pass. And that's what's been the case for a while because they're not willing to play hardball. So even though the Democrats have the House, they're not willing to use the power of the House to play hardball with the Senate. Instead, they let the Senate dictate law to them, and they just rubber stamp whatever the Senate is actually able to pass. So the point is that the Senate's kind of especially broken. The House passes laws all the time. It's the Senate that's broken. And it's a Senate that has been sabotaged and hijacked by the Republican Party to get an extreme agenda with the threat of it being totally broken, having the government shut down or not passing Defense Authorization Act and all these things. They're willing to go to the precipice for those things. Democrats are not. They're not willing to say, okay, fine. Well, guess what? We'll shut the government down. We won't pass the Defense Authorization Act. We'll do these things if you don't play ball with us. They're not willing to do that. And so somehow, even though American people just hate Congress, they just say the whole thing is whatever, I don't like all of it. The Democrats somehow feel like if we don't play nice, if we don't act like the responsible ones, they'll blame us. But no, they're just blaming everybody. And if the Democrats played hardball, I don't think it would politically hurt them any more than they're already hurt by being part of Congress, which everybody dislikes because it is semi-broken because the rules are bad. And I won't go into that. But basically, that's what we're seeing. It's a more uneven negotiation. And I almost hope nothing passes because I feel like this something might be worse than nothing. And sometimes elections do have consequences. And if you put people that are corrupt and have no values and you put them in the office, bad stuff happens to you. And I kind of almost feel like the Democrats enable this behavior by voters by simply trying to keep just keeping us just around the teetering edge so that we don't fall off into the ocean, but allows people to continue to vote in irresponsible ways and put people in office that will do irresponsible things. And the Democrats just kind of sit there and just keep it going just enough so that we don't fall into calamity. But you see this year, we've fallen into calamity. And those elections of 2016 and 2018 had consequences, and we have a broken government now.
Yeah. You kind of wonder, you hate to think this way, but you kind of wonder if there is some actual planning and intentionality associated with if you don't provide enough funding and you don't extend a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions, you're going to have in the short term people losing their habitat. And these are individuals among the 30 million people who have been dependent on assistance, that's just the financial assistance, now who are disproportionately people of color, disproportionately low income, people who might not vote for the current people in power. All of a sudden now, if they are homeless or houseless and they find it, they're going to be in chaos for the next month or two, may have to go live somewhere else, try to find some other place to live. And during that time, if they finally eventually find a place to live, guess what? They've got to register at that new place before they're technically eligible to vote. So this is a wonderful way to, in addition to all the other ways that the GOP is trying to repress and suppress the vote, to do that.
Yeah, I would say this, though. I actually think that, again, this goes to the cynicism of the Republican Party versus the non-cutthroat nature of the Democratic Party. Let's say all you cared about was winning elections. If you're the Democratic Party, you want things to be bad and to stay bad until November. Now, you made a good point about, you're right, people dealing with having to re-register, although honestly, you could theoretically vote with your old address. Like you know, that's, I guess, against the law, but I'm sure that happens all the time. You know, people vote and say, I mean, what's it, Mike Pence was voting Indiana like 4 years after he wasn't even governor anymore. Nobody noticed. And I think somebody noticed 4 years later, or at some point, someone noticed that because of freedom of information. I mean, God's vice president now. But I don't know if he wasn't. I don't know if they would even notice. But generally speaking, the Republicans are primarily getting blamed, at least at the executive branch level, if not Congress, for the pandemic, for the economic downturn. And they don't like that, but that's the case. So if you're the Democrats, you would necessarily, theoretically want things to get bad or even get worse. But what do? They actually try to play it straight, which I applaud them for in this case in general, trying to actually do the American people proud and actually serve us, and trying to pass, continuing to pass laws to keep our economy afloat, to actually address the pandemic, because they're actually trying to actually be public servants. As flawed as they are, they still fundamentally believe that concept of I'm in elected office, I'm trying to actually run the government well. On the other side of Republicans actually are like spiting themselves anyway, because they're not trying to do the obvious things to keep the economy afloat, to address the pandemic, and are actively harming people. I mean, it's kind of a bizarro world. It's like you think we're the opposite party. You think the Democrats were in charge right now, and the Republicans were trying to sabotage the government to win the election in November instead of it being the reverse. That's the weird thing that's going on right now. It's like it seems like each side is doing what the opposite should be from a cynical politics standpoint. But the difference is Republicans ideologically don't want to spend money and they just don't realize that they're actually shooting themselves in the foot by following their ideology.
I saw someone, I think it was Caitlin actually, post a notice about a event that's taking place this weekend. We were going to mention a little later, but there is a rally taking place all across the country for the people's stimulus. And what they're trying to do is show up. There's going to be a car caravan and march and rally at homes of our federal elected officials tomorrow, in which some of the demands that are going to be called for are Medicare for all, a monthly $2,000 cash payment for all, cover payroll to protect small businesses, and suspend student and credit card loan payments, as well as, I think, put a moratorium on foreclosures and rent payments. So, thing to watch for. If you have an opportunity, as soon as you get off this call and you are concerned about what we've been talking about, here's the phone number. Besides, finding out on tomorrow in your community, here's something you immediately do, and that is call Congress. I'm going to give you the Capitol switchboard number for you to call your senators and your representative. Hopefully you know who they are. Here's the number, 202-224-3121. Again, 202-224-3121. 202-224-3121. So before we move on to the next topic, we just thought we'd have a little fun here with this topic, since it's not really that much fun, is it? But we thought we would kind of turn the tables, okay? Congress is trying to gut basic needs of us, so we thought we should maybe see how they would feel if we suggested a few things to them. So imagine we're in charge, and what we want to do now is come up with a plan. And so we're going to ask you, if you want to vote, give us an idea here at Move to Amend of if it was up to you, what do you think our representatives and senators should have to cut, given that, hey, if we're all in this together, which we have heard supposedly rhetorically, we are all in this together. So if that's the case, we're going to give you 5 different choices that you have an opportunity to weigh in on what you think. You can only choose one, even though maybe it should be all 5, that you believe Congress should have to sort of tighten their collective belts over. One is cutting their salaries by 50%. 2, cut their health benefits. They have basically Medicare for all, gold standard, gold plated, platinum plated, whatever the case may be. 3, cut their stipends. They all receive a certain amount of money to have a second home in DC. Well, here, at least the Republicans are talking about not giving enough money for millions of people to live in one house. So how about that? We just cut your stipend to live in your house. 4th, a means test for salaries and benefits. A lot of these guys and gals in Congress are millionaires, if not billionaires. So let's mean test whether they should get a salary or benefits based on their income. And lastly, don't accept any political contributions or investments from corporations and the super rich. Not a nickel during the. So vote any one of them. Feel free to share that in the chat or some other way. Okay, why don't we move on? Michael, next topic.
Okay, yeah. So the next one is kind of a brief one, but I wanted to mention the fact that once again, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it was reported recently, is undergoing treatment for cancer. She's actually had a lot of ailments. She's actually been dealing with cancer for a while. I mean, so the current one is apparently liver cancer she's being treated for, and it's chemotherapy they're using to do that. She also, I mean, she was treated for colon cancer in 1999. She was appointed, I believe, in 93. She was appointed in 93. She was treated for colon cancer in 99. She was treated for pancreatic cancer in 2009. They caught it early because we know that's a very lethal cancer. But they caught that early. She was treated again for a recurrence of pancreatic cancer in 2019. She was also treated for lung cancer in 2018. And she also just, not cancer, but had a stent put in her right coronary artery in 2014. So she's a tough bird, but she struggled with illness a lot during her time as a Supreme Court justice. And of course, we're all only hoping, as a very reasonable jurist on the Supreme Court, that she makes it to the new year so that she can be replaced by another reasonable, at the least, jurist on the Supreme Court. But yeah, that's another thing that's kind of in the news right now.
Yep. And what I just find so unbelievably hypocritical is a lot of these senators, Mitch McConnell and some others, with a straight face, can say that if, hopefully nothing happens to Ruth Bader Ginsburg and she remains healthy through the duration, but if by chance she or anyone else leaves between now and then, they're going to work to fill that spot beforehand, even though they said, nope, we're going to allow the nomination of Garland to go through prior to the election of in 2016. Just unbelievably hypocritical.
Well, it's a superpower that some people have in office to have no shame. Yeah. Trump has absolutely no shame, which is like a super duper power that he can just literally say things with 100% confidence one day and say the opposite, the same, like 3 sentences later. Most of them don't have that superpower, but certainly the Republicans, I think John Thune was one of the people in particular that actually opined that we definitely would try to replace her, even if it was a lame duck, even if it was after the election, Trump won, and it was a lame duck session, they would still try to get it through before the inauguration of the next president, which in this case would be Joe Biden. And he was one of the people that said, we need to let the people choose. But he's on the record saying that we need to wait that last year and let the people have their voice felt in the election before we pick the next one. So, I mean, there's no shame. That's the thing. They're hypocrites, but they have no shame. They have no problem. And they'll smile at you while they're saying it to you.
Yep. Lame duck sessions are notorious at federal level, state level, even sometimes city level.
Yeah.
That they otherwise would never be able to pass, including raising their own salaries and just odious stuff that, you could never normally pass.
I'm trying to remember what state it was where, like, the governor, it was a Republican state, but the governor got upset and it was a Democrat got governor. And so the House, the legislature, which was still red, passed during lame duck. Like, they were going to, I think, maybe turn blue maybe, but they were during the lame duck, they took a bunch of the powers away from the governor so that when he came into power, it'd be hard for him to undo some of the stuff the previous governor had done.
Right.
Stuff like that. Yeah, it's ugly business.
All right, let's move on. I know last week, Millie and Shelley focused on what was going on in Portland, the uprisings and the beginning of the militarized pushback, and that pushback has intensified. But what we've also seen is sort of a nonviolent pushback to that pushback this past week. And, we have these federal agents, some of whom we have no idea where they're from. They're out of control. They are not accountable. We don't even know who they're getting orders from. what's the actual plan in place? These people seem to be in how they've acted. They're certainly untrained, seemingly inexperienced, incompetent, unorganized, and it may backfire. There may be a blowback. At least some of that in terms of intensity of resistance and response, not just from people who had been in the streets up to that point, but now bringing even new people out into the streets to say, wait a second, this certainly smells, if not tastes, through the tear gas, like something bordering, if not outright, militarized fascism and what we would see in some tin horn, dictatorship in some other part of the world that we don't believe has anything remotely having to do with a democracy. This surge of, and I even like the word surge, right? Trump is talking about a surge now of federal agents. Wasn't that spoken about in increasing militarized troops in Iraq a number of years ago? They want to put a surge now of federal agents that are on their way to Chicago, Kansas City, Albuquerque, Seattle, scores of other cities. I read in our local press, Cleveland, they may come our way in the not too distant future. Trump is claiming he has the authority to do this under the Homeland Security Act of 2002, signed by President Obama. Well, actually, no, both in terms of that act was signed by President Bush, not Obama. And second, he doesn't have blanket authority. There's opposition coming from the Portland mayor and the Portland mayor, who was hit by tear gas a couple days ago, and the Oregon governor, a lawsuit by the ACLU, and a federal response. A federal judge issued a temporary restraining order barring these federal goons from using force and threatening and trying to shut down the coverage by local journalists. And what's so interesting is these wall of moms and now wall of dads, flanked by their leaf blowers, are out there on the street using the leaf blowers to sort of push back the gas that's coming their way. So it's just ridiculous what's going on. It may end up, I know it's horrific, it's frightening on one level, but on the other hand, there's another level to where it's just such buffoonery, and that once again, these people just seem to be, literally shooting themselves in the foot politically in ordering these people to go out, because they're not, dealing with, I don't think the perception by the average person is they're reducing violence or they're de-escalating. No, just the opposite. They seem to be fomenting violence, upping the scale, adding to chaos, escalating what's going on, trying to goad people into doing something, prodding them by trying to, get them to act so that they can come down even harder and use that as. So, the whole thing may backfire, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. It's amazing what we've allowed kind of to happen and we oftentimes forget how powerful we've made the executive and made the policing powers in our own country, and the lack of triggers or things that we can do to counteract this. I mean, one of the biggest concerns of mine is, first one thing let me say is that I think a lot of reportings indicated they think a lot of these folks are ICE and border troops. They're not sure, but they definitely know that up the chain, the Department of Homeland Security, the acting chief that hasn't even been approved by Congress or confirmed by Congress, they're taking responsibility for it. But I think that a lot of reporting, they think it's ICE and Border Patrol people that are doing it. Anyway, having said that, it's a fact, one of the things that, and this is not just from this, but it's just in general what I've seen the last 3 years, is how tenuous the ability of the Congress to oversee the executive branch is, and how it seems like the president can cut off the ability for Congress to see kind of like communications between different entities in the executive branch, to talk to people that are serving the executive branch. And I understand the concept of executive privilege, but at some point, I think we need to work on passing federal law to make it clear what those boundaries are and what can and can't be invoked, because it seems like basically Congress has been almost completely hogtied and prevented from really doing any real oversight in the excesses of the executive branch. And that's the whole point. That's the balance of powers. We can't make every guy who's elected president, every guy or gal who's elected president every 4 years, a king for 4 years. And then after it's over, maybe we get to some idea of what they were doing for the last 4 years. That's not good governance. We need to be able to have a Congress that, at least if it's theoretically functioning, can look into things, can bring, that acting director of DHS up the hill and say, hey, what's going on? Who are these guys? It's not clear that they could even do that, even if they really had the political will to do so. And that's one of the things that in general has really disturbed me about the last 4 years, is in this way how broken the separation of powers is, and how it doesn't seem like Congress really can oversee the executive unless the executive just allows themselves to be willing to be overseen. It seems like if you're a Trump, if you just don't care, you're like, no, everybody executive privilege, nobody talk to them, give them no documents, see me in court. And they can just do that for 4 years. What kind of governance is that? It seems it's totally broken.
Executive branch has got way too much power. Way too much power. Just the only other thing to say about this is, Trump is sending in troops or agents or whatever the hell they're being called to Chicago to address the overwhelming violence and gun shootings and the like, of which there have been, no question. But, what's interesting about that is that, the gun violence that has occurred in Chicago, those guns aren't coming from any guns sold in Chicago. They're coming from guns sold outside the city. And, when there has been efforts to try to regulate or, see what these gun shops are doing, guess what? Gun shops have pushed back, and because of a law, you're unable to really find out what's going on. The Firearms Owners Protection Act of 1986 prohibits the AFT agents from making more than one unannounced inspection per year of licensed gun dealers, which, it's interesting because that really smacks of a constitutional right that we here at Move to Amend focuses on when we talk about ending never intended inalienable constitutional rights. It's more than just money in politics, more than just political First Amendment free speech rights. It's a variety of other things that other groups don't want to touch. And one of them is Fourth Amendment search and seizure rights. That goes back decades to where you cannot inspect on private property for a variety of things, including, having regulatory agents come in and make sure that workplace standards are upheld, environmental standards, a variety of things, that there's no chemicals that are being used. Well, here's an example, I think, where, okay, they came to some agreement, the NRA, I'm sure, pushed to say, look, we will allow one unannounced inspection, when by rights, Fourth Amendment shouldn't apply to corporations, to where if we think that there's something that is amiss and gun owners are just willy-nilly selling guns to people who shouldn't have them, or to kids, who knows, that there should be regulatory agents be able to go unannounced without warrants to check out these places. But you can't do it because in general, you've got these Fourth Amendment search and seizure, quote unquote, rights of corporations that would include gun shops, Inc. Just sickening.
Sure.
Well, we're going to want to move on. What's next on your docket here?
Right. Last one is the ongoing saga of the census. So, as you recall, back in March of 2018, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross announced, of course, with the support of the White House, that the citizen question would be re-added to the census for the 2020 census. This was, they said, of course, the story that we were given was that this was because the DOJ, of course, wanted to enforce the Voter Rights Act. But of course, the DOJ hasn't done any enforcement of the Voter Rights Act during Trump's entire administration. So this is kind of transparently false and a cover for what they were really trying to do, which has become more obvious now. So they do this, it eventually goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, well, it's interesting. I was looking at the decision this morning, and it doesn't really say that they couldn't do it, but it says that there are federal laws about how the Department of Commerce had to go about doing this. And they were so egregiously not following those rules that the question could not be on the 2020 census. So now on Tuesday, Trump issued an executive order directing the Department of Commerce to still somehow leave off its official counts for the number of people in each state, those it believes are undocumented people that are like not non-citizens, I should say. So these are, but it's unclear what process the Department of Commerce would use to do that, or if this executive order is constitutional in the first place. And so we are once again heading back to court regarding that. The ACLU has already said it's going to sue. Other people probably will join in as well. And the one thing I should point out is those counts are used for apportionment when it comes to the Electoral College. And you know that big map that, that Electoral College that actually decides who becomes president, those electors are apportioned based on the census, as are the members of the House of Representatives, the federal House of Representatives. So that does have a big effect on governance and how we are represented as citizens, as a, how much the states have influence. Each state has an influence on the federal government and on the electing of the president. So that's ongoing. It's a pretty, I say the Trump administration is an uphill battle, but they're going to go to court and fight it out, and we're just another thing we'll have to watch and see kind of what happens. But they haven't given up, and this is clearly why they were actually putting that question on there. It wasn't about the Voting Rights Act and enforcing it. It was about this. It was about the right-wing populism of blaming the others, of saying that these brown people invading us are taking over our country and we need to stop them. It's that whole narrative. That's what this is all about, and this order makes that clear. And so now we just wait and see and hope that our courts can save us once again from our, this corrupt administration that we're dealing with right now.
Yep. Okay, and I've got one more quick one because we are kind of coming up to an hour when we try to keep this at or under. That's military budget. People may have noticed that the House and Senate have recently passed the National Defense Authorization Act shamelessly at a $740 billion level, which is just exorbitant. Unfortunately, you've had a number of Dems side with Republicans in both the House and the Senate to pass that, and a proposal to cut a measly 10%, just 10%, got shot down with Democrats, which interestingly, it turns out, the Democrats who supported, or I should say who opposed that 10% decrease received on average 4 times more in military or in campaign contributions from the military industry than those Democrats who were supportive of cutting this by 10%. So little quid pro quo there. We spend more money on the military than China, India, Russia, Saudi Arabia, France, Germany, United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, and Brazil combined. And yet, we still keep spending the money, giving it to them basically scot-free. There's been no audit for years of the Pentagon. They always say waste, fraud, and abuse in welfare programs that help low and moderate income people, and they do audits all the time there, but yet they just, blind blank checks to the military for funds they know about and other funds in the tens of billions in their black budget that we don't even know exactly what it's spent for. So it's just sickening. And there you have it. We'll see where it goes. Supposedly Trump is saying he will not vote for it because in the package they are talking about cutting and reducing and renaming those military bases named after the Confederate generals. So who knows? Maybe Trump will be with us in terms of being opposed to cutting the military budget. How about that?
I think the right people will talk to him and let him know what a good deal this is, and he should take it. Go ahead. He'll make stink about it. He'll rail about it on Twitter, and then he'll quietly sign it. 2 things I wanted to say about that. One is in the Senate, it was about 50-50. I think about 20, it was 23 to like 22 or 23-23 in terms of Democrats for and against. The House actually, through that 10% cut, I should say, the 10% cut that Bernie Sanders proposed in the Senate, in the House. I think it was Ron Wyden in the House, I think. But it was the one in the House actually failed even worse. I think it was like 99 for 140 or something against as far as Democrats. So ironically enough, the Democrats actually held stronger in the Senate than they did in the House in terms of that 10% bill. But unfortunately, it's one of those situations where the funding the American empire is currently still bipartisan, and having, spending more money than almost the entire rest of the world on military stuff, carrying on 7 shooting conflicts around the world, none of which I think only one was actually declared a war, having military bases in something like 80 countries, all this stuff. These are imperial activities that we do that have bipartisan support because the military industrial complex holds on our government.
Yep, it's been that way from day one. When I was in DC for the IMF and World Bank protests a number of years ago, I walked by the Treasury building, and each door of the Treasury building has inscribed in granite, sort of an inspirational quote, and above one of them it said, quote, "Commerce defies every wind, overrides every tempest, invades every zone." And that word invade just sort of stuck out to me, right? Invade means to force your way in, or maybe you're not wanted. And how commerce can force their way in is if they've got your big bad military tanks, bombers, and aircraft carriers out in the harbor. Hey, the military is there to work hand in hand with international corporate capital, and has pretty much from day one. So, all right, we could say a lot more about that.
Of course.
All right, real quick, anything inspirational you came across this week?
Can't say that I did. I'll just say this, I always just seeing, people, I can't say it's this week, but just seeing the efforts. Like I think Cori Bush is running and trying to unseat a senator. It's like congressman, I think it's a senator actually in maybe Colorado. It's a Black woman, and that's always encouraging. I kind of feel like the world would be a better place if America was run by Black women. They've probably been the most important positive force in this country over its entire history. So I'm definitely hopeful for that she can win. I think it's an uphill battle for her, but I'm hopeful. I would probably say that.
Yeah. For me, I came across an article that talked about a new research from University of Pittsburgh showing that how helping other people really affects your brain positively in terms of when you volunteer and help others get sick less often, have less stress, live longer, and have improved, which helps stave off depression, which I think is so important these days as we are in this pandemic, and we need to help one another. And then another thing I came across in the current issue of The Atlantic is an article called "Love is Medicine for Fear." That again, in the era of the pandemic, full of threats, fears, uncertainties, and where we're isolated, it just sort of adds to that fear, and all the more reason why we need to think about love and expressing loves and saying we love one another, our family, our loved ones, our friends, to just society in general. And when you put those two things together, the Greeks have 3 different words for love. Eros, which is romantic love, philia, which is love for family and friends, and agape, which is love for your fellow human being. And we need love in all of those forms, particularly these days, to work us through these tough times. So, hey, brother, I love you. I love the Move to Amend family. I love being a part of this movement, even though we don't know where the hell it's going to end up, but it's worth the effort. So for that end, we just want to close by kind of giving a couple of announcements. You want to start?
Oh, I think, why don't you do the announcements? I think I have an older copy. I don't think I have all the announcements.
Okay. Our next webinar, we have these things every month, is scheduled to be Tuesday, August 4th. So do check in. If you're in the Move to Amend circle, you'll be getting an email about that. That's Tuesday, August 4th, usually 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 p.m. Eastern. Our upcoming actions for this week, previously mentioned, tomorrow, there are these national actions to demand a People's Summit. For details about what may be going on in your community, go to peoplesparty.org. movement.org/July-25-action. Our next live report is June 29th. Caitlin Sapoki-Belknap, our national director, will be sharing sort of a report on what's happened this last month. And that is next week, the 29th, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Tell people, by all means, who you run into to sign our petition. If you haven't done it yourself, please do so. You can go online to movetoamend.org/motion, or you can just take your phone out right now and put sign, text sign or text amend, either one, to 707-654-4019. To donate to Move to Amend, hey, we all on staff right now are furloughed. That's why we're very interested in this stimulus package to make it as generous as possible so that we can eat and survive. But if you can help us out to get back to financial solvency, go to movetoamend.org/donate. movetoamend.org/donate. Lastly, our movement education program is just a wonderful new curriculum. Check that out at radical-guide.com/movement-education-program. So that is all we have for this week. So happy you were able to join us. Thanks so much for your attention, and join us again. Well, there will be next week 2 new Move to Amenders sharing their reflections on the week's activities. Until next week, so long.